The air inside the black market hall was heavy, smelling of oil, sweat, and fear. Dim lights flickered from the ceiling, casting long shadows across rows of cages. Inside each cage was something living. Some were dangerous beasts with sharp teeth. Others were strange creatures with eyes too human for their bodies. Traders walked between them, shouting prices, making jokes. Arguing over weight and quality, it was not a place for kindness. It was a place where lives were weighed like meat. In the farthest corner, under a broken light that blinked on and off, sat a young alien woman. Her knees were pulled close too. Her chest and her thin arms wrapped around them as if she could hide inside herself. Her clothes were torn, her skin marked with bruises, and her wrists were locked in metal cuffs. A small wooden sign hung on her cage door, painted in crude letters, "Pleasure breed sold by weight." Two alien traders stood nearby, laughing as they placed her on a metal scale earlier that day, talking about her like she was a farm animal. They argued if she was worth the price of a hunting hound or just a few sacks of spice. She didn't look at them, didn't speak. Her head was down, eyes fixed on the cold metal floor. If she looked up, if she showed she was still alive inside, it would only make them hurt her more. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the hall. The traders turned to see a tall human man enter through the main door. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy, and when one appeared here, it usually meant trouble. This one was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark coat and carrying no visible weapon. But there was something about the way he walked, slow, steady, like he had already decided where he was going. He didn't glance at the exotic beasts or the glittering cages of rare animals. His eyes scanned the room as if he was looking for one thing, and one thing only. He passed the rows without stopping, his boots clicking on the metal floor. When he reached the far corner, he stopped. His gaze locked on the alien woman in the cage. She felt it a strange weight, not cruel, like the trader's stares, not hungry like the buyer's eyes. This one was different. Her heart beat faster. But she kept her head down. Maybe if she ignored him, he would walk away like the rest. One of the traders noticed the human's attention and stepped forward with a grin. "You don't want that one," the trader said, his voice greasy with false friendliness. "She's damaged goods, been through a lot. Not much use unless you want something cheap." The other trader laughed. "We'll throw her in with a hunting beast. If you pay good, free bonus." The human didn't laugh. He didn't look at the trader either. His eyes stayed on her. He stepped closer, his shadow falling across her small cage. The traders started listing other better options, showing him creatures that were strong, beautiful, or dangerous. He ignored them, his jaw tightening. Then, in a voice low but firm, he spoke for the first time. "I'll take her." The traders froze for a second, then burst out laughing. "You want that? She's barely worth feeding." One said. The human didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small pouch. He tossed it onto the counter in front of the traders. The pouch hit the metal with a heavy clink. The sound of credits was unmistakable. The trader opened it, his grin faltering as he saw how much was inside, far more than the asking price. He looked up, confused. "She's not worth as much." The human finally glanced at him, his eyes cold. "I said, I'll take her," he repeated, slow enough that every word felt like a warning. The traders exchanged a look, then shrugged. A deal was a deal. They unlocked the cage. The sound of the key turning loud in the quiet corner. The alien woman didn't move. She had been taken from cages before, but it never led anywhere safe. This human was strange, overpaying for something no one else wanted. He stepped forward, crouching slightly so his eyes met hers. Up close, his face was weathered, but his gaze was steady. Without a word, he took off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth made her flinch, unused to kindness. "Come on," he said simply. Not pulling, not forcing, just waiting. Her legs trembled as she stood, the cuffs heavy on her wrists. She walked beside him, the traders watching with amused disbelief. They thought he was a fool, wasting good money on something broken. As they left the hall, the noise of the market seemed far away. The smell of open air hit her nose, carrying scents of food, metal, and dust. She kept her eyes on the ground, the coat heavy around her small frame. Each step away from the cage felt unreal. She didn't know why he had bought her or what he would do next, but deep inside, a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in years began to stir. It wasn't hope yet, but it was close. The cold streets outside the black market were lined with flickering lamps and the hum of distant engines. She followed the human through narrow alleys, her bare feet silent on the uneven ground. The heavy coat he had wrapped around her still carried his body warmth, something strange and unfamiliar. Every few steps, she glanced at him, waiting for the moment he would demand what everyone else demanded, but he kept his eyes forward, his hands deep in his coat pockets, walking like he was simply going somewhere. Behind them, the noise of the market faded, replaced by the low thrum of the city at night. Vendors shouted over the smell of roasting meat. Children ran past carrying bundles. Strangers hurried home before curfew. She could smell the food, the spice, the bread smells that pulled at her empty stomach until it hurt. But the human didn't stop, not even once. She thought maybe this was a test. Maybe he wanted to see if she would beg for food before they reached wherever he was taking her. Her cuffs were still on, the metal digging into her skin. She wondered why he hadn't removed them. Maybe he liked the look of control. Maybe it was safer for him that way. Either way, she didn't ask. She had learned long ago that questions could lead to pain, so she kept silent, just as he did. The streets grew quieter as they moved toward the industrial docks. Large cargo cranes loomed in the shadows, lifting containers between ships. Dock workers in heavy jackets passed without looking twice at them. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions and no one gave answers. Finally, they stopped before a small freighter at the edge of the dock. It was patched with mismatched panels, some rusted, some newly welded. The name Mercy was painted on the side in faded white letters. She had never seen a ship like it up close. The human pressed a code into the side panel, and the ramp lowered with a soft hiss. She hesitated at the bottom. This was it, she thought. Whatever he wanted, it would happen inside, away from eyes, away from help. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow, but then he stepped aside and motioned for her to go in first. The gesture caught her off guard. Most buyers wanted to walk behind her, watching, reminding her of her place still. She climbed the ramp slowly, her legs weak but steady enough to carry her forward. Inside smelled of metal and old engine oil, but it was warmer than outside. The corridor was narrow, with low lights along the floor. He led her past the cockpit to a small cabin, a single bed with a clean blanket, small table, and a storage unit. There were no chains, no locks, no cages. It was plain, but to her, it was something she had not seen in years. A private space. He stepped back and nodded toward the bed. "You can rest here," he said, his voice flat, but not unkind. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Leaving her alone, she sat on the bed, running her fingers over the blanket, feeling the softness. Her body tensed still, waiting for the sound of the door locking, but it never came. She waited longer, thinking maybe he was testing her. Maybe he wanted to see if she would run, but the door stayed open, and no one came. Hours passed before she heard movement in the corridor. Her stomach growled so loudly she pressed her hands over it, embarrassed. Curiosity pulled her from the bed, and she stepped out quietly. She found him in a small kitchen space, stirring something in a pot over a heating unit. The smell was strong and warm, making her mouth water. He didn't look at her when she appeared. Instead, he picked up a plate, filled it with the steaming food, and slid it across the counter toward her. "Eat," he said simply. She froze, staring at the food. In the market, food was given only as payment for something. Her body tensed, waiting for the condition, but he had already turned away. Reaching up to tighten a loose wire above the stove, he wasn't watching her at all. Her hands trembled as she picked up the fork. The first bite was almost too much. The taste was real, rich, filling. She tried to eat slowly, but hunger won, and soon the plate was empty when she set it down. He took it without comment and began cleaning it in silence. She stood there, unsure if she should thank him, unsure if thanks would make her seem weak. Instead, she turned to leave. And just before she stepped back into the corridor, she heard him speak. "You'll need those cuffs off soon," he said, his back still to her. Her steps faltered. No one had ever said that to her before, not without mocking her first, that night. She lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the warmth of the blanket wrapped around her like a shield. She still didn't understand him. Men like him didn't. By women like her without expecting something in return. So why did it feel like maybe, just maybe, this time was different? The hum of the freighter's engines was steady, a low vibration that seemed to seep into the walls. She woke to the sound, unsure for a moment where she was. Then she remembered the cage was gone, the market was gone, and she was on a human ship. The blanket still covered her, its weight strange but comforting. She sat up slowly, listening for movement, but the corridor outside was silent. Her feet touched the cold floor, and she shivered. Everything about this place felt different from the cells and cages she had known. The air didn't stink of rot. The walls weren't covered in grime, and the lights were soft, not blinding. She moved to the door and peeked into the hall. It was narrow, with pipes running along the ceiling, and she could hear the faint click of machinery somewhere deep inside. She followed the sound until she found him, the human. Rylon, he was sitting in the cockpit, a mug of something steaming in his hand. The stars stretched wide beyond the glass, a sea of black and silver. He glanced at her, not surprised too. "See her awake. You slept long," he said, then nodded toward the co-pilot's seat. She hesitated, then stepped forward, sliding into the chair. It felt too big for her. But the view made her forget for a moment who she was supposed to be. "You've been in space before?" he asked, his tone calm. She shook her head. "I was born on a station, but never left," she murmured, her voice rough from disuse. He didn't press for details, just leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was the kind of silence that felt like a pause, not a wall. After a while he stood. "You should eat," he said simply, and led her to the small kitchen again, this time. She didn't wait for him to turn away before taking the plate he offered. The food was different: soft bread, warm broth, and a handful of fruit. She ate slowly, watching him move about the kitchen with quiet efficiency. He wasn't like the men in the market who stood too close, who stared too long. He moved like someone who had no interest in ownership, only in purpose. When the meal was over, he finally pulled a small tool from his pocket. "Let me see your wrists," he said. She froze, instinctively pulling back. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added, his voice low. After a long moment, she extended her hands. The cuffs were cold and tight, the metal having dug into her skin for so long it had left deep red marks. With a few clicks, the locks opened, and the cuffs fell to the table with a dull clang. She stared at her bare wrists as if seeing them for the first time. Freedom felt too light, almost unreal. "You can use the storage in your cabin for anything you want to keep," he said. Her laugh was short and bitter. "I don't own anything," she replied. Rylon didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Then we'll change that," he said, turning back toward the cockpit. Later, She explored the ship while he worked. The Mercy wasn't large: 2 sleeping cabins, a small common area, the kitchen, and the cockpit. There were patches on the walls where repairs had been made, wires tucked into corners, and scuff marks on the floors. But everything felt functional, cared for, as if this ship was more than just metal. It was his home, and maybe, for a while, it could be hers too. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered into the cockpit and found Ryland still there, adjusting coordinates. The stars outside shifted as the ship changed course. "Where are we going?" she asked softly. "Somewhere." "Quiet," he answered without looking away from the console. "Far from the black market, far from anyone who'd try to take you back." Her throat tightened. "No one does something like this for nothing," she whispered. Finally, he looked at her. "I'm not asking for nothing," he said. She felt her chest grow cold. There it was, the hidden cost. But then he added, "I'm asking for you to stay alive." The words sank into her like warm water. No one had ever cared if she stayed alive, not without a reason that served them. She didn't answer, but she stayed beside him for the rest of the night, watching the stars move past for the first time in years. The space beyond the glass didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a way out when the engines shifted to a low hum, and the navigation screen showed their course locked. Ryland leaned back in his chair. "This ship's called Mercy," he said, his voice quiet. "It's never been for sale, and neither are the people on it." She turned to look at him, and in the reflection of the glass, her eyes didn't look as empty as they used to. The days passed slowly on the Mercy. The hum of the engines became part of her world, a steady background sound that made the silence less sharp. Ryland didn't fill the quiet with questions, and she didn't offer answers. They spoke only when necessary, about food, about repairs, about the next stop. But in that silence, something fragile began to grow. She learned his name only because she overheard it in a radio call. Rylan, she repeated quietly to herself later. The sound of it strange on her tongue. It felt safer than calling him the human. Still, she kept her distance, both in words and in space. At night, when the ship's lights dimmed, the walls seemed to close in. That was when the memories came. Cold hands, locked chains, the sound of laughter when she cried. She would wake, gasping, her body trembling, her throat raw from screams she didn't remember making the first time it happened. Ryland appeared in her doorway so fast she thought he must have been waiting. He didn't ask what was wrong. He didn't touch her without permission. Instead, he crouched beside her bed and slid a steaming cup of tea onto the table. "Drink," he said simply. Her hands shook so badly she almost spilled it. The warmth of the cup seeped into her fingers. She kept her eyes down. Embarrassed that he had seen her like this, he didn't move away until she took a sip. Only then did he step back and sit in the chair by the wall. Not watching her, not staring, just there. For hours, he stayed, silent as the stars passed outside. Eventually, her breathing slowed, the trembling faded, and she fell asleep again. When she woke, the chair was empty, but the teacup was gone. It happened again 2 nights later, and again after that. Every time, he came without being called, and every time, he left without asking for anything. During the day, she kept to the common area while he worked in the cockpit or the engine room. Sometimes, she found small changes in her cabin: an extra blanket folded neatly, a pair of warm socks, a simple comb. She didn't know where he got them, but they were hers now. No one had ever given her something without expecting something in return. One afternoon, she was helping him tighten a loose panel in the kitchen wall. When she reached up, the sleeve of her shirt slipped back, revealing the scars on her forearm. Thin, white lines crisscrossed her skin. Some old, some newer. Ryland's eyes flicked to them. But he didn't comment. Instead, he handed her the next tool and continued working. The lack of reaction made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. Later, she found herself speaking without planning to. "They liked to mark us," she said softly, not looking at him. Rylon paused, leaning against the wall. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I want to." The words came slow, halting, as if each one had to push through years of silence. She told him about the cages, the way buyers would test them, the punishments for disobedience. She didn't tell him everything, not yet, but enough for him to understand. When she finished, he didn't offer pity or false comfort. Instead, he said, "You're not there anymore." The certainty in his voice was stronger than anything she had told herself. It didn't erase the past, but it made the air feel less heavy. That evening, as they ate, she asked, "What happens if they find me?" "They won't," he answered. "But if they do," she pressed. He looked up from his plate, his expression steady. "Then they'll have to go through me." The words shouldn't have meant much. She had heard promises before, all of them broken, but this was different. He didn't say it like a hero making a vow. He said it like a simple fact. Something in her chest shifted. Not quite trust, not quite safety, but close enough to make her want to believe him. That night, the nightmares came again. She woke to the sound of her own voice crying out. Rylon was there, sitting on the edge of her bed, his coat draped over her shoulders. She didn't pull away this time. His presence didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an anchor, keeping her from drifting back into the dark. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. It started with whispers. Rylon didn't tell her at first, but she noticed the change in him, the way he checked the scanners more often, the way his eyes lingered on the radar even when nothing showed. He began taking longer, more complicated routes, slipping through asteroid belts and abandoned trade lanes. When she asked why, he only said, "We're keeping ahead of trouble, but trouble doesn't stay quiet for long." Somewhere in the black market's web of deals and debts, her name had surfaced again. She wasn't just some forgotten captive anymore. She was property that had been stolen, and property had a price. The traders she had seen laughing at her cage were now furious. Not because they missed her, but because losing her made them look weak. They sent word to bounty hunters, pirates, and smugglers, anyone willing to track down a runaway for a cut of the profit. One night, while Rylon was fixing a loose heat coil, she saw a message flicker on the comm screen. She couldn't read all of it, but the words "pleasure breed, high reward, return alive" were clear enough. Her stomach turned cold. "They're coming for me," she whispered. Rylon didn't look up from his work. "They can try," he said, his tone calm but sharp like a blade. After that, she found herself watching the stars differently. Every blip on the scanner made her heart race. She slept less, listening for the alarm, for the sound of docking clamps or footsteps in the corridor. Rylon noticed, and one morning he slid a mug of hot tea toward her. "You can't stay scared forever," he said. "I've been scared forever," she replied quietly. "Then it's time to change that," he answered. They began running drills. At first, she didn't understand why he wanted her in the cockpit. But he explained navigation, how to read the scanner, how to shift power between shields and engines. Her hands were clumsy at first, but her mind was sharp, and soon she could plot a basic escape route without his help. The training gave her something she hadn't felt in years: control. She wasn't just cargo anymore. She was part of the ship's survival. The first real test came 2 weeks later. A bounty ship appeared on the edge of their radar, moving fast. "They found us," she said, her voice tight. Rylon was already strapping into the pilot's seat. "Then let's make them regret it," he replied. The Mercy wasn't built for combat, but it was quick and agile. Rylon dove into an asteroid field, weaving between tumbling rocks. The bounty ship followed, its heavier frame struggling to match. "Their turns, give me power to the rear shields," he called. She moved fast, her fingers flying over the controls, rerouting energy just in time for a blast to hit them. The ship shuddered, but held together. "Hold this course," Rylan ordered, diving through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids. The bounty ship tried to follow, but clipped its wing on the rock and spun off course. They were gone before it could recover, disappearing into a dark pocket of space where scanners couldn't easily reach. When the danger passed, Rylan leaned back, his breathing steady. "Not bad for your first chase," he said with a faint smile. She stared at him, surprised. No one had ever praised her for anything before. The warmth of it stayed with her long after the adrenaline faded. But the victory was short-lived. They both knew the black market wouldn't give up so easily. The bounty ship was just the first. More would come, and some would be better prepared. Rylan began altering the Mercy's registry, changing its ID codes and repainting the hull at small, hidden ports. Every stop was quick, every departure quiet. She started carrying a small blade Rylan gave her. Not for fighting, he told her, for surviving. It fit easily in her hand, the metal cool against her skin. She practiced with it in the empty cargo bay, learning the moves he showed her. Each time she trained, she felt less like prey and more like something that could fight back. Late one night, as the ship drifted in a quiet stretch of space, she stood by the viewport watching the stars. "I don't want to run forever," she said, her voice low. Rylan came to stand beside her, his reflection faint in the glass. "Then we'll find a place they can't touch you," he replied. "And if there's no such place," she asked, "then we'll make one," he said without hesitation. For the first time since she left the cage, she believed it might be possible. Not because the galaxy was safe, it wasn't, but because Rylan was willing to make it dangerous for anyone who tried to take her back. The Mercy drifted out of hyperspace into the quiet orbit of a remote human colony. It wasn't on most maps, tucked away in a star system that few traders bothered with. The planet below was green and gold, covered in forests and rivers that shimmered in the sunlight. From above, it looked peaceful, untouched by the chaos she had known for so long. Rylan guided the ship down through the atmosphere, the engines humming softly from her seat in the cockpit. She watched the clouds peel away to reveal small towns scattered across open fields. The sight made something ache in her chest. She couldn't remember ever seeing a place that looked safe. They landed at a modest docking bay on the edge of the colony's main settlement. There were no guards, no scanners, no lines of armed buyers, just a few workers moving cargo crates and laughing together. She stayed close to Rylan as they stepped off the ship, the sunlight warm against her skin. Every instinct told her to keep her head down, to avoid drawing attention, but here, no one stared at her. No one whispered about her worth or weight. The streets smelled of bread, baking, and fresh-cut wood. Children ran past with baskets of fruit, giggling as they bumped into her by accident. Her body tensed at the contact. But the children didn't even glance back. They were too busy chasing each other. It felt unreal, like she was walking in someone else's dream. Rylan stopped at a small shop and bought a paper bag filled with warm rolls. Handing one to her without a word, she took it hesitantly, half expecting him to pull it back, but he didn't. The bread was soft and sweet, and each bite seemed to melt into her. For a moment, she forgot the cages, the traders, the fear. For a moment, she just existed. They spent the day walking the colony, picking up supplies, tools, engine parts, preserved food for the Mercy. She noticed that whenever someone tried to ask about her, Rylan's answers were short and final. He never explained where she came from, never gave them her name. It wasn't shame she saw in his silence. It was protection, as the sun began to sink, casting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Rylan led her to a small building at the edge of town. Inside, it smelled faintly of ink and paper. A human clerk sat behind a desk, adjusting his glasses as they entered. Ryland stepped forward and placed a folded set of documents on the counter. "I'm here to register a new citizen," he said. She froze. "What?" she whispered. But he didn't look at her. The clerk glanced between them, then nodded, pulling out a form. Ryland spoke her name, the one she had been given before the market. Before the cages and the sound of it made her eyes sting, the clerk filled in the details, occasionally asking small questions that Ryland answered without hesitation. When the paper was stamped, the clerk slid it across the desk toward her. "This makes you a free citizen under human law," he said. "You have the right to live here, work here, own property. You belong to no one." Her fingers trembled as she touched the paper. It felt lighter than air, but the weight of what it meant pressed deep into her chest. She looked at Ryland, her voice breaking. "Why?" she asked. He met her gaze, steady. "As always, because you are never for sale," he replied, for a long moment. She couldn't speak. No one had ever seen her as more than something to be used or traded. But now, here was proof, real, legal proof, that she was more than that. She held the paper like it might vanish if she let go. They walked back to the ship under the stars, the quiet night wrapping around them. Every few steps, she glanced at the document in her hand, still half afraid it was some kind of trick. Ryland noticed but didn't comment. When they reached the Mercy, she paused at the ramp. Looking back at the town, the warm lights in the windows, the sound of laughter drifting through the air. It was a world she had never imagined she could step into. Later, sitting in her cabin, she unfolded the paper again and stared at her name. It wasn't just ink on a page. It was a future she didn't know she could have. She thought about the cage in the black market, about the traders laughing as they weighed her like meat. And then she thought about Ryland's steady voice saying, "You were never for sale." The truth of it sank into her like the slow, steady warmth of the ship's engines. For the first time in her life, she began to believe she was worth more than what someone would pay for her. The peace of the colony didn't last. It never could. Not with the black market still whispering her name into every shadowed corner of the galaxy. The warning came at dawn, a soft ping on the Mercy's long-range scanner. Ryland was all ready. In the cockpit, when she woke, his eyes locked on the screen. The signal was faint but clear. "They're here," he said. His voice calm but edged like a blade. She joined him at the controls, her heart pounding. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew. "The kind of man who doesn't stop until he gets what he came for," Ryland replied. The scanner showed one ship, moving fast, cutting across the quiet sky toward the colony. It wasn't just another bounty hunter. This one had a reputation. Even she had heard the name whispered in the cages, a tracker who never failed. They didn't have time to run. Ryland shut down the Mercy's main systems and locked the ramp. "We're not taking this fight into the air," he said. "Why not?" she asked. "Because if we're in the air, civilians get caught in the crossfire. This stays on the ground." He opened a weapons locker she had never seen before, pulling out a compact rifle and handing her the blade he'd given her months ago. Her hands closed around it, and this time they didn't shake. "You remember what I taught you?" he asked. She nodded. "Good. Stay close to me," he said. The tracker arrived within the hour. A tall, thin alien in dark armor stepped off his ship, moving like a shadow across the dock. His eyes scanned the area until they landed on her. He smiled, not with joy, but with the cold certainty of someone who believed the fight was already won. "Property," he said, in a voice like oil. "You've cost your owners a great deal." She flinched at the word, but before she could speak, Ryland stepped in front of her. "She's not property," he said. The tracker tilted his head, amused. "You think you can keep her from us?" he asked. Ryland didn't answer. He just raised his weapon. The first shot rang out, cracking the still morning air. The tracker dove behind a cargo crate, returning fire. The sound of blaster bolts echoed through the dock, the smell of scorched metal filling the air. She stayed low behind the Mercy's landing gear, her heart racing. Rylan moved with precision. Each step measured, every shot deliberate. But the tracker was fast, using the crates for cover as he closed the distance when the tracker got too close. Rylan switched to hand-to-hand combat. The clash was brutal, fists, elbows. The dull thud of bodies hitting the ground. She saw an opening and moved, circling. Behind the tracker, her blade flashed in the sunlight as she slashed at the side of his leg. He stumbled, just enough for Rylan to drive him back against the crates. "You can't kill me," the tracker spat. Rylan's eyes were cold as steel. "Don't need to," he said, and slammed the butt of his rifle into the tracker's head. The alien collapsed, unconscious. They worked quickly, binding his hands and feet by the time the colony guards arrived. The tracker was already secured in the back of his own ship, ready to be flown far away to a place where even the black market's reach would take years to find him. The guards didn't ask many questions. They had seen enough to know Rylan wasn't a man to cross. When it was over, the dock fell quiet again. She stood beside Rylan, her blade still in her hand. Her breathing heavy. "You fought," he said, his voice steady but softer than before. "I didn't want to hide anymore," she replied. He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Good. They'll think twice before coming after you." Again, that night, they sat together on the Mercy's deck, the stars bright above them. She turned to him, her voice low. "I thought you bought me." She said, "But you set me free." He met her gaze. "No," he said. "I just saw you for who you are." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the truth that they had both fought for, full of the understanding that whatever came next, she would face it not as a possession, not as a survivor hiding in the shadows, but as someone who had finally stepped into the light, and with Rylan beside her, she knew she would never go back.